Good evening, everyone. It's a pleasure to welcome you to the launch of the Art of the Possible report. My name is Rashmi Dhanwani. I'm the founder and CEO of the Artex company, and I'm here today to share the findings of this really important study undertaken by the Artex company research team, but for the National Center for the Performing Arts in Mumbai. This study, titled The Art of the Possible, putting into spotlight the scores of transversal and technical skill professionals that work in the live and entertainment industry, who sort of bring to life the vision of the director. It's focusing on their growth and development and their challenges in making a career for themselves in this sector in India. It's a primary research led study. It was commissioned by the NCPA in 2021 and actually took place between just before the second wave and a little after. So it was around pretty difficult circumstances that the study was actually executed last year. It looks at the transversal and technical skills landscape, as I mentioned, in the live entertainment and performing arts sector in India from the perspective of working professionals and related sector stakeholders, including venues, technical directors, um, just directors, actors, policymakers, and a range of other stakeholders in the ecosystem, including the arts media. The aim was to not only provide insights and recommendations to the NCPA for its work, and especially in the realm of artistic education, but also to look at what is the landscape of skills training in this country, particularly in this domain. What are the challenges within that landscape? What are the growth trajectories of cultural professionals within technical and transversal skills in India? And how do they sustainably grow their careers and themselves in this space? Through the course of the next 55 odd minutes, we'll take you through some key insights and recommendations from the study, followed by a panel discussion with leading voices from the industry. While you're with us, please feel free to share your thoughts and questions in the comment box, and we'll try to take them along with us during the discussion a little bit towards the end as we get into a Q&A session. So with that, I'll request my team to share the presentation. We'll be sharing some insights of the study with you. So these were the research objectives of the study. There were 5 key objectives. The first being, as I had mentioned briefly earlier, the sector in India tends to be informal, and there is not enough work, academic research in particular, around what does the skills landscape of the sector look like, even less so in the technical skills domain. So, as a first step, a key objective was to look at what kind of demon are we dealing with? What is the situation? What is the landscape looking like? What is its market potential? Even if we were to develop any kind of skilling program for technical skill professionals, and because of this known adage of like, hey, it's an informal sector. If you're walking towards formalizing the sector, is the sector prepared to take on that kind of a challenge? So that was the first objective, just to look at the landscape and its preparedness for formalization and its market potential. We then looked at identifying skill gaps and labor shortages, which were mainly technical and transversal. As we mentioned, transversal by definition means transferable skills. So a sound and or a light designer in the live performance space can do the same kind of work across dance, music, theater, of course, with some variation. But these are skills that are relatively easily transferable as compared to other skills, hence transversal. The third was we wanted to sort of focus on the professional development needs of cultural professionals in this space. The fourth was, how do you enter the sector? What are your pathways to the sector? What does a career in the sector look like? What is the composition of your career as a transversal skills professional? And what about the socio-professional relationships and workflows that inform your growth in the sector? And lastly, what are the learning behaviors of transversal skills professionals, their work mechanisms, and their preferences when it comes to working in this space, but also questions of sustainability. Can we move on to the next slide, please? These were the 10 areas that we looked at when we started out this study. So it was covering the domain of technical and transversal skills. And you will see on the x-axis, it's the number of people that have been interviewed and which category they belong to. And on the y-axis, you've got these focus areas. So light, sound, video, and set design and costume design. stage management, production management, light technology, sound technology, and video technology. As much as possible, we try to ensure there's representation from each of these areas. In some cases, the term video technology was not understood as it is, or it was clubbed into some of the other areas. So that's where we've got the least amount of or rather no inputs. But most of the others, you've got some input from the people we spoke to. You'll also see the kind of just to bring in a certain amount of intersectionality, the kind and diversity into our respondents, the kind of people we spoke to. So aside from the professionals themselves, we spoke to theater and dance companies and organizations, theater management companies, educational institutions, event management companies, service companies, and vendors such as light and sound vendors, the academic space, so universities, organizations such as NSD, vendors, as well as venue owners, as well as professional organizations. Next slide, please. In terms of the methodology, we looked at, as I was mentioning, primary research, which was led by interviews and focus group discussions. There are about 54 interviews and focus group discussions that were undertaken, and about 150 survey respondents. We also deployed a survey. Of the 150 survey respondents, about 97 completed the survey in its entirety, and the rest were partial respondents, but we took the data as we could. So in sum, over 200 respondents were involved in this study. Next slide. Coming into some of the key insights of the study, the first category of intervention, as I'd mentioned, of interrogation was, what does the sector look like and how does someone enter the sector? So as I have mentioned, it's an informal sector. There is no overarching policy framing its evolution and growth. As you know, at the central level, even though we think Ministry of Culture is the one single ministry that's responsible for everything to do with cultural policy, even though we don't have a formal culture policy, there are culture as a mandate has been deployed across 11 different central level departments, and there is state organization as well. So there is culture as a mandate even at the state level. So with this kind of a diffusion, it gets very challenging for theatre to find a permanent home, at least when it comes to policy for its growth and evolution. In terms of pathways to entry, it tends to be again informal. The professionals that we spoke to said they typically get exposure at the school and college level, and that piques their interest, and that's when they sort of find someone to intern with or volunteer with a play and then gain more skills on the job. So it's sort of an informal apprenticeship model that sort of operates. Hence much of the training occurs on the job. However, some who can afford it and are determined to make a career in this space do take a step forward and collect funds and do manage to go abroad and take specialized masters or undergrad degrees in these areas. But that's a small minority in comparison to the larger groups that are there. The You would think that someone who works in sound and light design would be the only thing that they do. That's not really the case. They may want to actually work in theater, but theater as a sector is not sustainable, and hence they have to work across different other allied sectors. When we asked this question to our survey respondents, we asked them that, how do which other domains besides theater that you work in. The three top can sort of most prominent options that emerged for education, events, and film. So someone who's in theater working in these areas is also likely to work in either one or several of these allied sectors, making the entire sector composition, or the composition of their career composition, very, very diverse. And that also means that there is a constant need to upskill and be able to sort of improvise and transfer knowledge from one sector to another on an ongoing basis. The reason for such a diverse career portfolio, as I mentioned, was financial sustainability on the one hand, and the other is also a desire to learn more. With respect to the sector's the informal nature of the sector, there is definitely very, very few programs that exists within the space that speak of formal training. Some of the larger theater courses do have modules in transversal skills development, but the fact that there aren't the kind of courses that you tend to get in other parts of the world, which are 3-year deep, 4-year masters undergrad programs in these spaces, they tend to be relegated to the realm of informal sector. Shall we move on to the next slide, please? With respect to learning behavior and work mechanisms, the questions that we asked in the study was about what do you prefer from a learning perspective? How do you learn? What are your preferred modes of upskilling yourself? As we've mentioned, these platforms to learn and upskill tends to be quite limited, but also your career structure in a way doesn't allow you to step away and get into deeper learning programs on an ongoing basis or even periodically. So much of the learning occurs on the job. Or in the survey, out of 147 respondents, most of them highlighted learning via observation and learning from peers as major contributors to their growth and development. Their motivations to learn ranged from passion for the craft or a desire to learn new skills. Um, since many of them are not no, are unable to afford specialists, many professionals were tasked with handling various aspects of a production. So they, so you may be doing sound, and someone has asked you to also, can you also like sort of help out with costumes, and this kind of gets them to sort of understand a little bit of all domains. And as I mentioned, the informality of the sector and the lack of standardization, it creates some pretty unsustainable work environments for the sector. We'll expand upon that when I share a little bit of the survey data with you in one of the following slides. Next slide, please. With respect to skill assessments, gaps, and needs, quite a few of the respondents felt that most people who enter the sector require a lot of training and they are underqualified. And this is not, far from what our original, insight around career pathways and entry into the sector was about the fact that they just land up in the sector. There's some exposure, they want to try it out, and there's no formal entry into the sector. There's no very little formal training that you end up getting. So this creates a certain kind of gap the minute you enter the sector. So someone has to do a lot of work to train a young person into all of these skills. There are our research pointed out to significant lack of health and safety protocols for a various range, including various range of professionals, including and particularly women. There is a lack of pedagogical peer learning. So while there's a lot of on-the-job learning, it's not supplemented by conferences, critical papers, write-ups in media, journals, and articles around the craft of technical skills production. And that does not, again, allow for reflective understanding of what kind of work has been created. Most of the courses that do occur tend to be in English and some of them in some regional languages. And this does create another layer of barrier, which is not always visible. Who can access these kind of courses? Several of the courses that were pointed out, aside from some of the ones that are homegrown, some that are done in collaboration with foreign cultural organizations, tend to be in English again. Of the 98 respondents who identified barriers to upskilling, they mentioned three main ones: high course fees, unfavorable location, and lack of time. Next slide, please. Just a little bit of insight from the survey data. There's a lot more in the report, but there are two pieces that I'd like to point out here. One has to do with we asked the respondents, what do you consider as a low value production, mid budget production, and a high budget production, and we consolidated and averaged out the responses. A low value production is around 2.5 lakhs, medium budget is around 6 lakhs, and high budget is around 10.66, so almost 11 lakh. But this was an average that we took out. But when we were looking at the data, we looked at outliers in the data. So sometimes low production budget were as low as 10,000 and as high as 5 crores for a high production budget. Now, this is also to keep in mind that a lot of the transversal skills professionals, as I mentioned earlier, work across allied sectors. So in responding to this data or this question, they may have thought of which of the other areas that they need to work on. This points to a significant gap. So when you talk about how much do theatre makers earn, how do you sort of which area to support, the data that you're able to get is weak. It's not possible to sort of, unless you're doing a much larger research study with a lot of quant data, it gets very difficult to understand how do you help someone in this space, especially when it comes to sustainability. And this was the point that we were trying to make earlier, that all of these aspects, informality, work hours, pay, career progression, because there's so much informality across these areas, this particularly renders the sector vulnerable, unsustainable, and it's a sector that's difficult to navigate. One other important survey data point that to pick out was that 40% of the survey respondents have adapted their work to the digital domain. We know that across the larger art sector, many of them have adapted to the digital domain, but this is a crucial one to point out because technical skills were far harder to migrate to the digital domain. Something to think about. Shall we move on to the next slide? We'll be talking about the recommendations in the discussion as well, but three clear areas of recommendation. One is formal training programs and visibility for the transversal skills space, and common spaces of learning and sharing where the professionals can come in, even if it's not for formal education. Venues can take a much active role in enabling skilling, peer sharing, and legitimacy for the technical skills professionals. So production credit templates, post-show feedback forms, stronger technical teams. These are very critical recommendations for the venues. And finally, if there could be a consolidation of best practices and repositories that the sector can learn from, we've uncovered in our research there is a lot of relearning and ongoing learning that occurs because some of this significant data is not shared amongst professionals within the domain. Next slide, please. That's it. I think you can drop in a line. We'll just at the end of the present this entire session, we'll just drop in another link for you to access the report. Over to you, Mahima. If we can have the rest of the panel, I'd like to introduce everyone. We'll jump into a discussion. I'd like to invite Bruce Guthrie to begin with. Bruce is the head of theatre and film at the NCPA and also the person who commissioned the study. He has several directing credits, but his recent works include Seawall, Constellations, both at the NCPA, Man to Man at the Wales Millennium Centre, Rent at St. James Theatre and the UK tour, The Last Mermaid at the Festival of Voice and Wales Millennium Centre. Bruce is also a member of the Guildford School of Acting's advisory board. He was the artistic director of the National Youth Theatre of Wales in 2015 and 16, and the associate artist for Pop Tango in 2011 and 2012. And he's worked on a series of concerts and events, including the Prince of Wales' 70th birthday celebration. I'd like to also bring to the screen, since we can't bring them to stage, Satvika Kantamneni. She's an independent production and stage manager for theatre and live events based in India. She's a graduate in collaborative theatre production and design from the Guildhall School of Music and Drama and is currently a producer with Ekivarious Productions and production and stage management mentor at the Drama School, Mumbai. She's been a senior stage manager for Disney Aladdin in India and has worked with QTP Entertainment as company stage manager. Has been a festival director at Thespo. Her theatre credits include The Kite Runner with Ekivarious and D for Drama, Ediga de Ke Jinnat with the Bhasha Center, Mukti Dham, Great Expectations, and The God of Carnage, the last one with QTP. Shankalita Chakrabarti, who is our representative from the British Council, and the British Council has supported the study. She's the head of arts of West India at the British Council. She's passionate about art and culture, gender and human rights, right to education and mental health. She has worked across education and the creative sectors with a quest to understand intersectional synergies to work for causes close to her heart and be a change driver. Currently, she's leading on the festival strand of the work at the British Council and oversees operations of the arts work in West India. And finally, Sunil Shanbag, who is a theatre producer, director, television writer, and documentary filmmaker with over 3 decades of experience. He's a founding member of Arpana, a repertory company that was set up in 1985, and of the Masha Theatre, founded in 2014. In 2017, Sunil was awarded the Sangeet Natak Academy award for theatre direction, and his work spans across themes and issues that concern modern Indian society across class, caste, gender, and other inequalities. His acclaimed productions include Cotton 56, Polyester 84, Sex, Morality, and Censorship, Stories in a Song, among many others. He's also been involved in using theatre training techniques in education, and his work, be it in theatre, film, television, or education, speaks not only to his technical prowess and creative instinct, but also to his acute awareness of social issues. Welcome, everyone. Delighted to have you all. Thank you for joining us today. I'd like to open this discussion with Bruce. Bruce, my first question is for you. The NCPA commissioned the study. Could you please share with us the reasons for doing so? What was the impetus that led you to commission the study? And what were the central questions that you were hoping to get answers to that you, I believe, have got to a certain extent from the study?
Yeah, well, thank you very much, Rashmi. And first of all, I just want to start by saying thank you very much to everybody who's helped to bring this report to fruition, as it were. But that it feels like that this is just very much a conversation starter. And I just want to make that clear is that the report, whilst it's been incredibly useful for us and that we're really pleased with it, and the reasons which we commissioned the report, I think you've outlined quite beautifully in your introduction as well. But that one of the big things was during the lockdown is that we had several theatre ADAs with people from across the country, and as the kind of digital necessity evolved as we went on, is that we were connecting with people and having conversations with people that we wouldn't necessarily have been able to do or had the time to do or known was necessary, really. So this past 2 year period has kind of forced everybody to be together and to think and reassess the way in which they make work and the way in which we maybe support each other and the way in which we work together. So this report is partly a response to that. It's also is it's a response to, and that this is something that comes through in the report really quite well, I think, is that how disenfranchised people feel. And you can see that with technicians, with designers, with stage management, with production management, all those people who kind of exist. And there are all these different diagrams that show this is that it's either represented as a pyramid or as an iceberg or whatever it needs to be, but that the actors and the performance are the very tip of that. And that all the people that are involved in being able to make that happen are not necessarily seen and not necessarily valued in the way that makes them feel valued and included, and that they are just as important, and in some cases even more so than necessarily than people give them credit for. So that's one thing. The other thing is that we wanted to be able to support in this area. So we want to support designers in theatre, we want to support technicians, we want to support stage managers. And the best way to do that is to, first of all, look at what is actually happening. And so for that, we need people's continued support and help and feedback. So the report, which will be up on the website, which people can download, anyone can download, you register your details with us, and then you can download the report and read the report, and then you can give us more feedback so that we can integrate that into the report, so it becomes a conversation, it becomes a living document, and it's something that we can then begin to shape a response around. This has been a fantastic start, and already from the people from across the country which I've spoken to about the report have been incredibly positive about it, and incredibly positive about the intention going forward to help people who work in this part of our sector, this vital part of our sector, to be able to develop their skills, to be supported, to be able to diversify their portfolio of work as well. And in the end, it benefits all of us. That rising tide raises all boats mentality is really important. I want to say thank you as well to you and your team at ArtX for putting together such a comprehensive report, and a huge thank you to the British Council for having the kind of the foresight to be able to and you know the feeling of knowing how important that this is. So they have backed this, and also to my team at the NCPA, who have worked really tirelessly through what has been a very, very difficult period for everybody. So for us, it's about knowing what the situation is, knowing the areas in which we can add value, and then devising several streams of work and training and upskilling in order to be able to support those people who work with us.
Thank you, Bruce. And I think that kind of thought leadership coming from an organization such as the NCPA is actually what we needed after what has been obviously some of the most difficult years for performing arts across the world. So thank you for that. And speaking of feedback, I think I'd love to hear from a couple of our other panelists. So Sunil and Satvika, if we can have you respond to the report. As I know we've had a brief conversation earlier, both of you had a chance to read the study, read the full report. If you could share with us what were the key findings that for you were the most important ones or most relevant to your work, and if there were any surprises to what you already know to be true. Satvika, if you want to go first.
Thank you, Rashmi. Um, the the report as a whole, I mean, was great because, and we had this conversation earlier. It was great to read all these insights because then it meant that things that we are talking about backstage or in addas or with our friends in the evening are actually things that people across the country are thinking are issues that, you know, plague our community across boundaries. One of the things, of course, was that I found very insightful was the data that showed the prevalence of the gender divide. And you mentioned that upfront, where there's so many more male respondents to the survey than female respondents, and how that, of course, yes, that was listed as a limitation to your to the research, where you know the responses are very male biased, but also that you know that is the situation in the industry at the moment. There are so many more men than women, and therefore the landscape is a gendered experience. There are fewer female role models, and that will also have an impact on sort of the pathway to entry, which is already so informal. And so, if young women aren't seeing women in positions of power or women holding these transversal skills, they may not know that these are things that they can do. Another thing was the how, because it's an informal sector, training, like you mentioned, is largely on the job, and that only occurs if you know people are passionate about learning for the craft, which the survey also highlighted that one of the main reasons for wanting to upskill is passion for the craft. But then the challenge with that is that there is a lack of standardization in the training that occurs. You will pick up what you do pick up or what you have been taught, and so therefore, if you're working with different kinds of theater groups, if you're working on different scale productions, if you're you know if you're working on a production that was 10,000 rupees or a 5 crore project, or if you're working with one theater company versus another, there is just no standardization in the training that will occur, and therefore, every time you work with a different company or in a different structure, there's always going to be new things to learn, which if there was this some sort of standardization, we could have avoided that basic thing. And then the third thing that I would like to highlight is the lack of recognition and appreciation for the transversal skills workers across the industry. And that actually, I have to admit that I clearly live in a bubble because I thought we had gotten past that. So when I read that in the survey, that came as a surprise because I really thought we had gotten past it and we were recognizing stage managers and production managers and our designers and operators. But the report clearly highlights that we have a long way to go in recognizing, even within the industry, and of course, in recognition from the government as well. Yeah. So those were a couple of my points.
Thank you, Satvika. Sunil, if you'd like to respond, because I mean, I have a couple of responses to Satvika's as well, but would love to hear from you
Oh,
first.
well, I think Satvika, what she said right in the beginning is really perhaps the kind of response you've been getting now from, the few theater people, practitioners that you've spoken to, that, for a lot of us, what is the study has thrown up is familiar. Okay. It's something that we have known and we have sort of, dealt with, and could be in informal ways, could be in other ways, but it's something that we have known. But the fact that a formal study, and a fairly comprehensive study, what it does is it kind of validates what we have known. It also becomes a very important tool. Okay, so it cannot be an end in itself. It's just the beginning, as Bruce pointed out, it's the beginning of something that we have to do about it. But more importantly, and this is what really depresses me, is that this report highlights the woeful conditions in which the performing arts have been working in this country for years and years and years. I mean, look at it. I mean, there's nothing in it for people to enter except the passion. And that's amazing. And in fact, I would say that's the strength of the thing. So I think we have to be very careful that we don't ditch the passion in our attempt to formalize it and systematize it. But I think now we go beyond anecdotes, even though we in India love telling stories, but we need to go beyond anecdotes and do something about it. The second thing is that, I feel my response to theater is not a homogeneous practice, neither in a city or nationally. And I think somewhere, if we can keep that in mind, because the people who this study refers to, they are actually the only common people across diverse theatre practice. That's so interesting. The said guys will service any play. They're not concerned about what scale of the play. If it has a set, they are there to do it, right? Similarly with the technicians. So we really need to look at that very, very carefully, because that is really going to determine what kind of steps we take ahead in terms of training. Uh, yeah, so I think first of all, such a study can only be undertaken by large institutions, and I'm really happy that NCPA has stepped forward to do this because it requires resources, it requires a kind of a breadth of vision, and I'm glad that they've done it. And I hope this is just the beginning of more such studies, because we really need to understand this sector for various reasons, even if it is to tell the state and the powers that be that we exist, and and we contribute substantially. So yeah, thank you. I mean, I'm glad it's been done. It's great.
Thanks, Sunil. Satvika. Just to sort of bring what both of you have spoken about. I think one thing is really clear is just how training occurs, whether it's on the job, and the modality of that training, and the conditions of that training. I think that comes through very clearly in terms of what has resonated with you. Sunil, you spoke about passion, and I think that's an interesting one because while there's oodles of passion and we really appreciate it, it shouldn't always compensate for security.
Absolutely.
And I think that's one thing that report makes very clear, and it's great to be able to see that and not romanticize
Absolutely.
passion as a substitution for. So that, it sort of comes through quite clearly, but also your overview on how do we look at this, not because theater itself is not homogeneous, to be able to look at viewing the sort of importance of these responses in that larger context of what challenges they face across various domains within this space. And we'll pick up on the gender part in some time, because that was a really interesting one. I remember in one of our focus group discussions, we actually had a couple of female respondents who told us at the beginning of the discussion that they want to bring up this point. They made sure they brought up this point and then sent us feedback after the session, speaking about how much of a gendered experience for them this has been. And this also cuts across geography across the country, how it differs across the country. So it sort of became a very strong rallying point for us to think about, is it as equitable as we think it is? Is it as responsive and credible as we think it is, in terms of ensuring that everybody gets that equanimity of access and credit? So it actually tested our own comfort zones in some ways. So thank you for pointing that out. I'd like to sort of bring in Shankalita here. Shankalita from the British Council. I know Shankalita, British Council has worked a lot on various projects, especially in relation to skill development for the culture sector and capacity building for the culture sector. You have, in every 3 to 5 years, in any of your major projects, this as either one of the most significant projects or a stream across an underlying theme across most of your larger curatorial and artistic projects. Given that kind of work that you do and the importance of capacity building, how does this report fit into, according to you, the larger context of skill development and the creative economy in India? How can this kind of a report create the kind of impact that we are hoping for it to create within India's culture sector?
Yes. Hi, Rashmi. Good evening, everyone. It's an honor to share the space today with such stalwarts from the art and culture sector, and it's an absolute pleasure to speak at the launch of the Art of the Possible report, which British Council has supported. So, British Council has led a significant body of work in skill and capacity development across our programs in arts education and English. And the strategic focus of our arts work in India includes structured and systemic intervention to respond to sector needs and challenges, and also to support capacity building of and leadership development of stakeholders from across the creative industry. And equality, diversity, and inclusion lies at the core of all our programming. So, if I talk about some of the development projects that we are working on currently, one is the South Asia Festivals Academy that we are doing in partnership with the Edinburgh Napier University, and it aims to build the capacity of arts managers and arts leaders from across South Asia. The Festival's Connections program is a more informal learning and skill building space. It's a series of online events for festivals leaders and professionals that we are running with Arts and Culture Resources India. And we also recently got out the creative economy scholarships that provided students from India to pursue postgraduate study in UK in culture policy and arts management at leading UK universities. Also, one of our most ambitious program projects, the Festivals from India platform, it's set to go live in March, and that also has a dedicated section for festival managers, leaders, and organizers to connect, collaborate, and learn from each other and upskill themselves. So, with our arts work being strongly embedded in the in sector development and growth, our focus is to work strategically with institutions, governments, creative hubs, and networks to bring about bigger impact and systemic change. The Art of the Possible research study that is supported by British Council, the report brings to light some of the key challenges, needs, and gaps that the performing arts and live entertainment industry is currently grappling with. And also, the first edition of the Taking the Temperature report that was developed by British Council in partnership with PICI and Artex records some of the impact of the pandemic on the creative economy in India. It states that 53% of events and entertainment management sector experienced 90% of their business cancelled between March and July 2020. 41% of the creative sector had stopped functioning during the lockdown, and 88% of the sector fears social distancing will impact the creative economy over the long term. And the second edition of the Taking Temperature report states that 16% of the creative sector is actually now facing permanent closure. The third edition is due to be published in a few weeks' time, and it will give us some more insight into the current situation. So, Rashmi, as you've mentioned, and others on the panel have also mentioned, that the culture sector in India is largely informal without an overarching policy. And the report also reveals that there is a lack of affordable and adequate educational options, in lighting and set designing and stage management. And this poses significant barriers to professional growth of technicians and set designers. As the report also shows, majority of the respondents' entry into the transversal skill space, it has mostly happened through exposure to theater at the school or college level. And most of the learning, as everyone has said, happens on the job. So, in terms of building a career in the theater, and also in terms of building a career in the theater landscape, acting often takes the lead, and technical knowledge and design expertise become secondary. Technical professionals, as Satvika mentioned, that often have to multitask, and this really restricts their professional growth, and it restricts them from developing specialist skills. And this also limits the scope of theater, performing arts, and festivals to collaborate internationally. The report make some very strong recommendations for systemic skill development program for the theater production designers and technical managers, and aims to inform education institutions as well as state and central government partnerships. So my hope is really that this report finds strategic importance within the sector, and some of the recommendations from this report are actually put into action.
Thank you, Shankalita. Speaking of recommendations, let's bring Bruce in again. Bruce, starting with you on this next bit. We've actually given a sizable number of recommendations both to you for how NCPA could look at the work, but also mainly for the sector. So I know that, since we put this out, we've had a third wave. There is still the vulnerability of whether things can continue or when do we stop work, depending on another wave. So given all of these constraints, what is your next area of focus when it comes to the output from the study?
I think that for me is that it's about evolution, not revolution. So it's about us being sustainable within that, and it's about us taking the time that it takes to get things right. At the moment is that we've had this pause, and that now things are beginning to open up. We're being cautiously optimistic about the fact is that Theatres are at 50% at the moment. Hopefully it will go up to 100% sooner rather than later. And actually is that the response that we've been getting from audiences thus far at the NCPA has been incredibly enthusiastic for the work that's been going on. We've had house-full shows for Indian music, for dance, for theatre, for Western classical music as well. So concert, we just had a weekend full of concerts, and we're still at 50% capacity. But the response from the audience has been fantastic. Audiences crave it. They want to be back in community spaces. We are communal animals by nature. We want to be together and experience something happening in the moment, in the room, and we're there. We just want that. And so for me, is that it's about us looking at that, building from there, and also looking at the many different streams that we are working on in the NCP, whether that be with education, whether that be the presentations that we have here, where we invite companies to come and perform, whether that be our own productions as well, and structuring them in such a way that it supports this kind of ethos on that practical level. The second thing is about communication. So communicating with venues from across the country and getting us all on a similar page, not necessarily the same page, because that's not necessarily helpful, because each different community, each different city, each different type of performance requires, in many cases, a specific kind of skill set. But there's a lot of different skills, as we call them, transversal skills, that can go from one section to the next, to the next, to the next, and can be absolutely applicable through a variety of different things, which only increases people's employability and the range of work that they can do. So there's that. And for us, is that it's about, and I've said it earlier, but I'm going to repeat this until I will keep repeating it, is that it's a conversation. It's the beginning. We know the why. We know the why that we're doing this is because we want to help to support this area of the sector to be able to be the best that they can be. There is no lack of talent. There is a lack of resource. There is a lack of money. As we might as well just point that out as a thing. And there's a lack of time. And that the lack of time usually comes down to the lack of money and the lack of resource. So there's that. The people, which is the most important thing that sits in the center of that triangle of time, people, money. People are in the middle there. So time, resource, money, and then the people are in the center of the triangle. Is that they're the most important thing. And I don't think there's any lack of creative people or brilliant people or dedicated, passionate people who want to be a part of the performing arts. But it's our job, not just NCPA or any big institutions, but as a community across the country, if we want to improve this, we are going to have to work together in order to be able to do it. And we want to work together. That's the thing. We know the why. It's just the what and the how that we need to figure out.
So, Bruce, I just want to pick up on one point that you mentioned was communication. And, NCPA is in a unique position to have some significant conversations with similar organizations across the country. And you have also, in your answer just now, spoke about us coming together to see how this can best happen. Is there something in that space that you would be also looking at in terms of communicating with other venues or getting venues to come together to do, at the very least, share best practices or, share information within their own networks of technical and transversal skill professionals?
I think the biggest thing is that, like I said, is that the pandemic has meant that more and more people have reached out and talked to each other, not just myself, but my fellow genre heads as well. I've been talking to venues across the country because it's that thing of, the NCPA creates the work that it creates. Can we take it out? Can we work and collaborate with people from across the country? And, Indian music and Indian dance already do that. Indian music has been doing that for a number of years as well. The department here led by Dr. Rao has done some terrific work. But what we want to be able to do is to build on that. And to, now that we're coming out of this 2-year stint, is that everyone is now kind of like looking not only what has happened before, but what could be. We've spent 2 years dreaming about the idea of, coming out the other side of this. And I remember very clearly when I was stood at the back of a show that I was directing live music and live singing begun, is that it kind of struck me in that moment that there was a real feeling of this might never have happened again. And I know that sounds really quite dramatic, but this has been a huge deal for us. And now getting back into the space is that it feels like such a privilege, and that now it's up to us to be able to make out of this what we want it to be going forward. And that comes from listening to what groups need in order to make better work. It comes from listening to other venues as well, and us talking about, kind of like, so how can we, kind of share resource. And I'm not even just talking about money, I'm talking about in terms of knowledge and skill. And that's partly why we're sharing the report just now. So advanced copies have gone to various different heads of organisations across the country, and conversations have been had already just in advance of this, so that they could promote it from within their own organisations as well. But now that we're sharing this, we want people to read it. And once again, I keep reiterating that, because there will be opinions out there that before people have actually read this. And if there's something in the report that does not reflect your reality, that does not reflect your sector, give it a voice. Write to us. If you go to the website, then once you register with us and we get your details, there's an email there that people can write in, and that they can give us their feedback, their experience from the report, or kind of like get us to add more to it.
Thanks, Bruce. You've given your perspective from the venue and how the venue can sort of respond to some of the recommendations and what you could do. To bring in Satvika and Sunil here, we would love to hear from you as well, because it's I mean, here's a report. It can lie here. Someone reads it and says it's interesting, but what do you do about it? How do you respond to it as an individual, as a part of a theatre group, or as a part of another venue, or as a part of a touring production? How do you respond to these recommendations? Would love to hear from you on that.
A couple of things that I thought we can immediately start, implementing is in my own practice. One of the recommendations was developing templates for various processes, and I do that on productions that I work on, and I know some other people who do that as well. And there is an informal sharing of these templates. If I need to create some sort of a report and I don't have a format for it, I will go and ask my peers in the industry, or I will look it up online, or I'll watch a YouTube video. I still learn from there. So it would be great if the stuff that we have already created is available in a central repository somewhere, and everyone else has access to it. Right now, only if someone reaches out to me and asks me for a template, I'll give it out to them, right? So if it was available centrally somewhere, that would be helpful. And then also, if we then make available your best practice case studies or best practice processes, and there is a lot of work, for example, that there are all of these templates and case studies available in the UK. So when I was studying there, we had these templates that we could follow to do with health and safety, or how you do different tasks in your line of work. So just to have these available in a central system, I think would be supremely helpful to everyone else, my peers and my colleagues.
Thank you, Sunil.
Yeah, well, we've been fairly preoccupied and concerned about the whole idea of training, and it actually comes from personal experience as a theater director. I mean, I feel that unlike, say classical music or music, which has training systems in place, and we in the theater don't even have a common vocabulary to communicate, right? So when I say give a certain direction to an actor, there's no guarantee that he or she will understand what I mean. So very often the first 10 days of rehearsal is just spent in arriving at a common vocabulary. And that is really sad, and it points towards the lack of systemic training. But at the same time, also I'm a little concerned about what kind of approach will we take to training. Okay, are we going to do one of these high skill, high value training programs, or will it be a combination of that plus, because as I was saying, there's diverse theater practice. Okay, and the other thing, as Satvika pointed out, is there's a huge resource of knowledge lying within the community, right? That's how it has been, right? So my phone, as Satvika pointed out, I have contacts of various resources across the country that have used in my time. Everybody in the theater has this kind of resources, knowledge. So I feel that the training somehow tap this knowledge, somehow if we can find some kind of a common mean at which to train people, so that we don't we don't want everybody need to be highly skilled and can operate video projectors and that digital stuff. Sometimes I just need a I need a technician who has the imagination and the aesthetics to light beautifully with four lights. We need that kind of range, right? And I suspect that will be the bulk of the requirement of the theater practice in this country. So I think we need to keep that in mind. Otherwise, we'll kind of get lost. And third, I think we must have very careful and close discussions about what is the Indian aesthetic. And I don't want this to sound, no, it's not. It's not that it's not that whole Indian culture is super. It's not that. But the fact is that there is an Indian aesthetic, and we have to guard that value. There is a certain value. The way we use tell stories, the way we use colors, the way we see things is different, and that is a strength. We don't want to suddenly change that because somebody has decided another aesthetic is more fashionable or comes with more resources to the table, and hence, so we have to be very careful and have very careful discussions about this. That's really what I want to take away. And finally, I think the other point of the gender thing, that what was interesting was that it was so predictable that where you'd find the women and where you'd find the men. I think that needs to be broken. Those walls need to be broken, and we need to make our rehearsal spaces safer spaces. In the past, we've been hearing too many examples of bullying, of abuse happening in the rehearsal space by very highly entitled people, and we need to make those spaces, and there is a growing awareness of this, so perhaps this is the right time to do so.
Thank you, Sunil, for both calling that out and making that statement. I think it was much needed. One of the conversations we were having earlier is how do we get a year in the government to this report, and how do we get them to see this as a critical concern? So I would love to bring Shankalita back on. Shankalita, since British Council has been doing a lot of work with the government across various domains, not just arts and culture, but also education. If you could share your perspective or your thoughts on how can we get the state government or even the central government to notice this kind of research and respond to this kind of research and make the changes that we have to. Shankalita, you're on mute, I think. Shankalita, you're on mute. The line of 2020 continues into 2022.
Yes, Rashmi. So, British Council's global strategy and programming is informed by robust research studies, and which brings to light the needs and demands of the arts entrepreneurs and stakeholders who sit within different creative sectors. And this helps us in designing sector responsive programs. Um, a recent creative economy research study that was commissioned, that was undertaken by the British Council and commissioned by the Ministry of Tourism, West Bengal, went on to map the quantitative and qualitative impact of the Durga Puja festival across 11 different segments, including arts and crafts, designing and advertising, retail and culture, and so on. And uh, the research report, I mean, it showed that the festival's contribution is up to 3.58% of the state's GDP, which is around INR 32,377 crore. And last year in December, UNESCO inscribed Durga Puja on the representative list of the intangible cultural heritage of humanity. And we are thrilled that the British Council's research made a contribution into this inscription. So, with the Art of the Possible report, Rashmi, we hope that this finds, I mean, this report acts as a useful guide for state and national cultural policy development. And as the report recommends, there is a clear need for developing training opportunities for the technical and design professionals. And the report has really given voice to the people from the ground and the limitations they face. And now, um, through collaboration and within the sector, I mean, the report really needs to find its strategic importance within sector leadership and address some of the challenges that technicians and set designers face and that they have talked about in this report.
So, what just to sort of paraphrase what you're saying is that you have seen impact emerging from a study, at least in the case of the government of West Bengal, where
Yes,
there is a figure that's been put down to the economic impact of a festival.
yes.
So, if we were to talk about this report, what area do you suggest we look at? I'm assuming it would be employability, because since we're speaking about skills, so would it be therefore better to approach those ministries that look at these areas?
Yes, Rashmi. So it's exactly how you put it. So, looking at the gap in the sector, the skill gap in the sector, what kind of interventions can be designed by the sector leadership, by the government, by higher education institutions. So this report really needs to reach the right audiences who can design interventions that will actually lead to professional growth and that will ultimately add to the creative economy of the country.
Thank you, Shankalita. If you could stay on and we could have all the panelists back on as well. I know that we're edging closer to the end of our discussion, but my last question is actually to all of you, maybe starting with Sunil. Uh, we've heard everyone's perspective here today on their response to the report and how they would look at recommendations. If you have to give one piece of advice or one request to anybody else who's on this stream, who's listening to what we're talking about, who's reading the report, about how they could contribute to the next steps that are emerging from the study. So it could be, everyone from an intern, a volunteer, to a theatre director, to a venue owner, to a policymaker, anybody you choose. What would be your one bit of advice and what to take away from the report, and how should they contribute to the efforts that we're making as an outcome of the study?
Yeah, well, I'm a great believer in networks, and networks within the practice. I'm skeptical about the intervention of state, etc., in this sector. We are best left alone from that basis. And also, so I would appeal to practitioners across the country to read the report and respond to it, like Bruce said. I think if we can treat this as a living document, I think it will have great, great value. We don't have this kind of information. And I'm pretty sure people will have, say that in our place, this is not how it is, except there'll be lots of diversity. And I think that'd be great. So, and also it becomes a very interesting talking point. Anything that has been done with a certain amount of thought and rigor can be a very good beginning for a variety of activities. And if practitioners, if you first of all have to make this available to everybody, I'm sure that you will put it on, etc. But we have to somehow make sure that people read it and respond to it, and set off little initiatives in their own areas, and maybe we can find a way to network and do a lower cost but widely network kind of activity. And that's my dream, actually. Yeah.
Thanks, Sunil. Shankalita?
Yeah. So, as Sunil mentioned, that I think there is great merit in the report being read widely, and that it reaches the right stakeholders, and I think from a sector perspective, as an organization working towards cultural relations and I think some of the things that can really make a difference is exchange program with countries of practitioners from India. I mean, exchange program with countries that are leading in technical and set designing and production, and also partnership with organizations that represents the cluster, such as Events and Entertainment Management Association, FICCI, and ACRI, for example, and also leveraging digital platforms where I mean for knowledge sharing and skill building.
Thanks, Shankalita. Satvika? And we can end with Bruce after that.
I think the most immediate thing and the easiest thing I would hope that we can do is recognize our talent. Um, if it even recognize all the people that are working on your play, even if it is a one woman show, there are a lot of people that have worked on that production to make this one woman do her performance on stage. So recognize your talent, give them the respect they deserve, even if it is about creating flyers or credit lists. Do that, just put in that little effort and recognize all the people that work really hard because of the passion for the craft.
And Bruce, I need to end with you.
Yeah, and I'll just reiterate kind of some of the things that have been said and add to it by saying this is that I would encourage people to think about this not as an instead of, but as an as well as. So it's not just one thing or the other or the other. It's about us looking at what is going on, and then for us all to be able to continue that conversation about how best to approach this in a variety of different ways. And it's not about washing anything out. It's about encouraging and inspiring people to do better and to continue growing, because that's it. I mean, it's one of the great things about working in the arts, and one of the great things about being a director is that with every play that I do, or every musical, or every show, is that you're constantly learning, and there is that. But wouldn't it be fantastic if there was a way in which that you could feel the freedom to be able to explore what it's like to have a venue with 4 lights, or to have 40? Wouldn't it be amazing if you could meet with like-minded people from across the country and discuss mutual kind of challenges and find different ways in which to be able to address this? We are a creative sector. We, deal in ideas and inspiration. That's what we do. We should apply that to ourselves. And this document is a starting point for that. And I want to say thank you to everybody who's participated again, and everybody who's about to participate in it. I thank you in advance, and we look forward to some conversations in the future.
Thank you so much, Bruce. So that's a clarion call for anybody and everybody who is a part of this sector, whether you are from the technical and transversal skill space, or from other domains within the theatre world. Do join us. This can grow and become something far larger, or at least fulfill its ambition and mission with you being a part of that journey. So the one thing that's asked of all of you is to, at the very least, share your feedback, read the report, circulate it to the right people, be conscious and conscientious about your role in this entire domain, whether it's giving credit to someone who hasn't got credit, or whether it's calling out people and situations that need to be called out. So the baton goes on to you. With that, I'd like to thank our panelists, Bruce, Satvika, Shankalita, and Sunil. Thank you so much for joining us today. To the National Centre for the Performing Arts and the British Council for both commissioning and supporting this study, this very critical research. I know it for a fact that when we were, starting some literature review on this study, we looked at the kind of research that's come out in the past few years, and we could pinpoint to about 4 studies over the last 25 years that we could use to talk about or think about how the sector has evolved. So it's great to be the 5th study over the last 25 years to add to what is a very, very small pie, but we hope to be able to see it grow larger and larger. To the audience and to the research respondents, I know that some of you who've been listening to this stream have also been a part of the study. Thank you so much. This would not have been possible if you had not taken out yet another 15 minutes from your life filling up a survey, and we're happy that we're able to present the findings of this survey to you. There is a web link shared by our team in the chat. Please share feedback and comments. You can download the report through that web link. And for any other information you need, you can write to theatre@ncpamumbai.com. We have several other activities and events both at the NCPA and in the Artex company. You can follow us on social media on both these organizations. The British Council also has quite a few programs coming up. We'll share everybody's links here. With that, thank you very much. Have a wonderful week ahead. It's just a Monday, but we're getting into March, and let's march onward. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.